Hello, this is Bruce Timm, producer, and
James Tucker, producer.
Glen Murakami, producer.
Dan Riba, director.
Rich Fogel, producer.
this is one of our favorite episodes, Legends. This is a story that James and I actually came up with the idea for this while we were in Korea. We were handing out...
Yeah.
We had our first meeting with Coco overseas to talk about the show, and it was our last day in Korea, and we were wandering around this historical Korean town. You remember, like this, this famous Korean town.
We were
in
actually
Seoul.
getting a historical tour, and we weren't paying any attention.
And they
to
were
these
getting all
people.
mad at us because we kept talking about this thing.
This
But
story.
We just, I don't know, we'd always wanted to do an episode that was like the classic Justice League and Justice Society crossover stories that they used to do in the comics every year. And so we just started talking about that because we were bored to tears in this historic Korean town. It's like we didn't care how people in Korea ate 500 years ago, and they were showing
grind up corn
and
stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And so we started talking about this, and we just started throwing ideas around, and we had a pretty good idea of what the story was going to be. We didn't have it all worked out, but we had the ending.
Right.
And what's interesting about it is that we'd actually even come up with the twist that the Justice Society's world had been destroyed in a nuclear war, and we said, that's really dark. We're not going to go that dark with this series, so we won't do that. So we won't even pitch that to Rich. So we got back to the States. We kind of pitched him the idea for the story. He liked it. And we didn't tell him the nuclear war aspect of the story. And then when Andrew Kreisberg took his pass on it in outline, he ended up putting the
that's right.
Well, he and I discussed it, so
okay.
we were on the same page.
So it's funny. So we ended up at that point. It's like, okay, that's too good. If we're all thinking of the same thing, then we kind of have to go with that.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so this is again one of our favorite episodes, probably because it's very classic, traditional, DC Comics Justice League JSA crossover, even though it's not really the JSA. When DC Comics got the outline for this, they said, you can't do that to the Justice Society. And it was kind of touch and go there for a while. We didn't even know if we were going to be able to do this story. We didn't know. I mean, there was so many things that we would have had to have changed in this storyline to actually be able to use the Justice Society. We didn't think it was even worth doing it at that point, and then that became our alternate possibility, is to change the characters so they're not exactly the Justice Society. You can clearly tell who they're supposed to be, but they're not actually the Golden Age Green Lantern, the Golden Age Flash, and the Golden Age villains like that guy.
I talked to a lot of the people at DC during this time, and they actually really liked the story. They wanted it to be told because they understood what we were trying to do, and it was great that we were able to come up with a way to do it that made everybody happy.
Right.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people think that this is a parody, and it isn't really. If you read old Golden Age Justice Society comics, they're very much like this. They're very arch, but they weren't doing it. Again, they didn't think it was tongue-in-cheek. They just thought that's the way you told comics back then, and it was a different world. And that's really what this episode is really all about. It's not even specifically about the Justice Society. It's really contrasting the way we remember the world and the way, the world is. And I mean, there was a movie that came out about a year before this called Pleasantville, which what I like the idea of Pleasantville is everybody has like this nostalgic fondness for the way things used to be, and they think the world used to be really sweet and innocent. And then it's like, well, yeah, in a way that's true, but then there was also really bad things about the world back then that are better now.
Yeah.
So it's all about how kind of nostalgia can be, misplaced.
And we should be too. Let justice prevail.
One of the things that we worked really hard on in this was to try and follow the logic of the old comics, which really got wonky in places. The motivations of the villains and everything are straight out of the old JSA comics.
Oh, and their dialogue is too. I mean, we're not even lampooning old dialogue.
Right.
They talk the way characters actually talked in those old Golden Age comics. But
it was also a way for us to set apart what we were doing with the Justice League from the way that the superhero things had been done before.
Right.
And, it really set it out in strong relief by putting these two groups together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like our version of the Justice League here is not as dark and adult as they became in later seasons, but even so, compared to the way old school characters were done in the old days, they're definitely clearly a little bit more mature, a little bit more dimensional. I love the character designs for all the stuff. I see James's hand in almost all of this.
Absolutely.
James has a very he loves that old school stuff. He loves the Dick Sprang and the
Chester
old
Gould.
Chester Gould and Milton Caniff kind of characters. So yeah, the character designs, especially all the incidental characters, look very, very old school.
Yeah, this was
really
a blast
cool.
to work on. I think we split up. I think you ended up doing most of the heroes, and I designed all the villains. And
You even took a pass on some of the heroes too,
yeah,
and
I did.
it's like
but
some
they
of
were
it was
really
like back and
pushed.
forth.
Yeah, I mean they were really broad.
Yeah.
So I think you pulled them more into so they weren't quite as goofy.
Right.
But
But all the villains, for especially those, were all yours.
yeah, that was the ciphers for the Injustice gangs.
Mm-hmm.
I'll let the air out of their balloon. Not so fast.
I mean, that's verbatim dialogue practically.
But I don't know. I think these guys are cool too. I wouldn't.
Oh, I like
I'd
them.
work
I'd
on
love
this
to see
show
them.
too.
Oh.
Absolutely.
Man.
I love
Now
the
again,
villains.
as I've mentioned elsewhere, it's like, so even though DC said we couldn't use the Real Justice Society, that turned out to be a plus. Every time they've done that to us, every time they've had a problem with one of our stories and they wouldn't let us use their characters, it's actually turned out to be for the best.
Yeah.
For instance, I'm not sure there was a Snapper Carr character in our original, or maybe there was. Was the Roy character, was he in the
Yeah.
Ray?
Yeah, he was.
Okay. But you know what? The Justice Society didn't have a Snapper Carr. They didn't have a
Right, that was our insertion.
Right. So it actually works better, but and I have to talk a little bit about Ray here. It turns out, if anybody who's not seen this episode, I'm going to spoil it for you, but Ray turns out to be the villain of this piece, and he's kind of a combination of, in my mind, he's a kind of combination of Ray Bradbury and Roy Thomas. Roy Thomas is a famous comic book writer who is also probably the world's biggest Justice Society fan. And, sure enough, if there had been a nuclear war when Roy Thomas was a 15-year-old kid and he somehow got amazing mental powers to be able to, change reality, I am convinced he would do this, that he would bring the Justice Society to life. And Ray Bradbury, of course, is known for a lot of his stories deal with, nostalgia for the way things used to be and how cruel and heartless the world is now. And so his name kind of reflects both Ray Bradbury and Roy Thomas.
I remember the recording day on this. The most surreal thing was seeing Ted McGinley and Udo Kier walk in at the same time. And I just looked at Bruce and we were looking at each other and thinking the same thing. How weird is that?
I know we've had like some really weird eclectic casts before, and this one is a doozy. I mean, you got Jeffrey Jones, Neil Patrick Harris, Udo Kier. I mean, you got Andy Warhol's Dracula in its Saturday morning cartoon,
And the greatest American hero.
Yeah.
and the
William
greatest
Catt.
American hero. That's right, William Catt,
And Michael-
David Naughton.
Did we say the American Werewolf from London?
That's right.
Is that
American
him?
Werewolf. Yeah, that's him. That's him. And the Dr. Pepper guy.
Oh, it's a geek
Yeah.
fest.
I know, it's crazy.
And Michael McKean.
Yeah, that's right,
Yeah, you
yeah.
got Lenny in here. So I mean, it's an awesome cast. My favorite one of those I remember is I think it was an episode of Batman, and we had literally the cast lined up in a row. And on one end we had Jeffrey Combs, the Reanimator, and on the other end of the cast we had Captain Parmenter from F Troop. So this is still during the early phase of the Green Lantern and Hawkgirl's relationship. They weren't really flirting with each other yet or anything, but she's kind of bonding with him a little bit here, going off on his part of the adventure and sympathizing with him, and because he's like the big comic book geek who's finding out that his heroes aren't real and trying to get to the bottom of it. And Hawkgirl we had played pretty tough up until this point, but this is one of the first chances where she gets to show her softer feminine side. And I remember there was a lot of debate at the end of the show, how far we were going to go with that, when she's comforting him at the end and chose to err on the side of romance, and she actually kind of does the Princess Leia thing and puts her head on his shoulder at the end, which is kind of neat. But it's so weird seeing him without the mustache.
I know,
and
with
the hair. It's so funny. I have to mention Lolita's score for the show too. Again, I think this is just a really dynamite score. I think the old school stuff is really cool. It's really fun and kind of old fashioned, but all the straight stuff too, all the stuff that deals with the lost world and the world ravaged by war and everything is really, really spooky and eerie and very emotional as well. So It's weird because at this point in the story, we know that something's not right, but we're still continuing on with this
Right.
weird old golden age adventure story and expecting the audience to go along with it. But I like Black Siren, by the way. I think she's a neat design. She's one of my favorite designs of these old guys. I remember we had a hard time coming up with what's the city going to look like. And we decided to kind of make it look like the old comic books in terms of the buildings being just very boxy and very stripped down. And the color palette, we didn't want to go complete comic book color with it. We didn't want to have like, you know, purple buildings and yellow skies and stuff. We wanted it to be somewhat believable. But it is clearly a much brighter pastel world than what we were used to doing in our show.
James wasn't done doing the Dick Sprang thing
No.
from the Legends of the
Oh,
Dark
yeah,
Knight
the
episode.
Legends
so.
was just the warm up for this
Yeah.
one. Or-
Any chance James has to go and do Dick Sprang stuff, he goes crazy.
yeah.
So here, I love the theme. This is the Justice Guild theme here. I just think it's really cool.
Some nice animation right here.
Oh, it's really nice.
It's Adam Van Wyck storyboarding.
But even his acting is really good.
Yeah, yeah.
That's awesome.
It's really nice.
Doing our job, Sergeant. Take them away.
Take them away. Even their color palette is a little bit brighter than even what we were doing. I always complained that our first season color palette was too bright anyways, but for the Justice Guild guys, it's brighter still. It's even more bright than
I like all the
what we-
reuse.
This one
Batman
gets
stuff.
dark.
Some friends. It's a good thing the
Yeah, it's cool
Justice
stuff.
Guild was around to save me.
They're not.
Now the story's going to get really, really dark and twisted.
You heard me. They are not the Justice.
Andrew Kreisberg, who wrote this episode, was working on The Simpsons at the time, and he is a huge comic book fan, and this was just like his dream job. He just really nailed it with the script, I thought. He gave us so much good material.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's tricky because we could have gone overboard. I mean, it's probably a little bit of a parody, just a tiny bit, because you kind of have to push them a little bit. But this could have become just a really bad parody, you know.
Right, yeah.
And but he found exactly the right tone.
Yeah. Well, he obviously loves the stuff, and that comes through with the material. But like, I mean, these cops that he put in there, they just, I love them.
Yeah.
That giant robot we stole from a Doom
Doom
Patrol
Patrol.
comic.
Yeah.
It's a Bruno Premiani design.
This isn't the right era at all, but what the heck?
No, it's still. But you know what? We looked at 40s era robots, and they
Right.
looked really dumb. It's like
Right,
it's one
yeah.
thing to make something look really dumb, but we wanted to be
Right.
dumb and cool. And I don't remember who found that Doom Patrol robot, but we said, "Oh, now that's what we need."
Living memory of a civilization destroyed 40 years
It's a nice contrast with the one in part one, too.
Oh, that's right.
Oh,
Because
yeah, yeah.
starts out with the Evangelion mecha.
Right.
The anime-looking
Anime
thing.
mecha, yeah.
Someone starts to figure things out.
This is really cool too. It's like you listen to the JGA guys. Their acting is like they're still. It's interesting because they're having to face this reality about themselves, but they're getting just a little bit more serious, and it's like, wow, it's tricky.
Well, we
Wasn't
get
the
into-
idea that Ray's basically talking to himself at this point? I mean, he's making
No, I think
them.
he's recreated them.
Oh, so
No,
they're
not
separate
They're not
entities?
following his. Yeah,
Oh.
kind of. He's actually brought them back to life, kind of.
Oh, I always thought they were just
No.
his.
They don't do what he wants.
Oh,
No.
I thought it was some weird psychological thing where he was fighting himself.
No, it's very Roy Thomas.
I overthought it.
Well, actually, Roy Thomas did do this in
And
the Kree Skrull War
and
in the Avengers.
he admitted that he got the idea from Gardner Fox. So
Oh, really?
It all comes back
Oh,
to
that's funny.
Gardner Fox wrote him a letter, and that's where he
Wow.
got the idea. And he was going to do it with the Justice Society,
Ah,
but he wasn't working there anymore.
gotcha. That is a messed up design. I don't remember who designed that. But that
You
I
did.
did.
Yeah.
You did.
I was just looking at that mouth theory, and it's like, where did I come up with that? That looks like a mistake.
You did.
It's
and-
weird.
that little throbbing thing on his head.
Well, I like the throbbing thing. I don't have a problem. I love that. That's the menagerie villains from the Star Trek.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had to help turn that too. That was not fun.
Luck.
I remember we had a lot of fun doing the constructs for the Green Guardsmen, because
that's
at that
right.
time Green Lantern didn't do that.
Right.
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 So we were just going crazy with them.
This is really twisted.
Well, our when we started doing Justice League, the sort of mantra that we had was, we're not doing Super Friends. We're not doing Super Friends. And then
So we thought constructs were stupid.
and when we first got the first part of Secret Origins back and we saw them together for the first time, we said, hey, they look kind of like Super Friends.
Yeah.
But
And it was kind of cool.
yeah,
It was
no,
kind of
we
neat
liked
seeing them
it.
all together.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
You get that little geek rush.
Yep. Well, I still think that works in theory, to not have Green Lantern making constructs, but
It's just not as fun.
it's not as fun, and it's one of his shticks.
Yeah.
It's like if Green Lantern's not making constructs, then he's barely Green Lantern. What's the point? People thought we weren't doing it because we were lazy, and it's like, no, we would love to design constructs and stuff. We literally thought it was silly and old school. We thought it was something that people wouldn't accept, but
Yeah, and we were lazy. We didn't want to have to design them all. No, we had that conversation. I know that. It's like, God, we don't want to have to do all that, do we?
James is lying.
No.
It's not true.
He's misremembering.
Back me up, Glenn. You are on the
'cause you guys
production
had your
side.
own little
I
reality
think we
happening
were
there.
trying to make him more serious and
Well, yeah,
different
that
than
too.
how we did it
Yeah.
before. So we were trying to.
Yeah, I mean, we had the challenge of, how do you get people to accept these as real characters that they're going to relate to? And if we got too silly with them up front, it was going to pull them out. I think it was okay that we sort of worked him into it gradually.
Well, and we
Yeah.
also wanted to separate him from the Kyle Rayner Green Lantern that was introduced in the Superman show.
Yeah.
Right.
Who did nothing but constructs.
Yeah,
and-
the logic of it was that if he was this tough as nail
Military man.
Marine, he was
Yeah.
going to do things in the most efficient
Sure.
manner possible. That he
Yeah.
wasn't going to build a big Cadillac for them to ride
I was-
around
I
in.
He'd use
still-
it like a gun, yeah.
I would still maintain that if he can shoot laser beams with the ring, why does he need to create a giant laser gun
Sure.
to shoot laser beams?
Oh, yeah.
So it makes sense if he's going to make giant hands or something that's useful, but if he's just going to shoot, create a bigger laser gun, that's silly. So we never have him do that, but we'll have him make, big knives and big hands and things like that. But yeah, there's definitely a shortage of that stuff in season 1. Yeah, this is really nasty when you think about it. They're beating up a little kid. Though I suppose technically he's probably in his 30s or something.
Right,
by
he's
now.
not a little kid anymore.
That's true.
Right.
It's gross that he's got fingers that are fused together. I just now noticed that.
It's your design.
I know.
Yeah.
It's weird. I haven't seen this show for a while. It looks a lot better than I remembered.
It looks pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a
It's a little
print.
bright.
Yeah.
It's the polar opposite of Batman the Animated Series, that in that respect. I love the music here. This is really, wow. Nice, really haunting. Oh, it's so sad. I mean, this is literally the scene that we came up with in Korea, James and I.
Oh, right,
we
yeah.
started with this bit and wrote the story backwards.
I remember
Collect your hankies.
it was really hard to come up with this melted city
Oh, right.
because we didn't want to make it too horrific, too
Right.
real.
Oh, because of, yeah.
So we had to be sort of like sand or wax that kind of had to feel.
Well, yeah, we were still in our phase of not wanting to go too dark.
What happened?
They're almost like sandcastles.
Well, not only that, but here's the other thing too that I remember that we dealt with this is we had to keep the sky blue because we didn't want this to be a completely hopeless end at the end
Sure.
because this is literally the destroyed world has happened years ago. He's actually kept the people from going on with their lives, and not only that, but the Justice League are going to leave these people here.
Basically,
So it's
yeah.
so we needed to leave a ray of hope. I remember the original painting on this had like a mustardy brown sky.
It was a
And-
lot dirtier.
Yeah, it was a really horrific end of the world. So we needed to brighten up the sky. That looks like something from the Fall of the House of Usher, the
Yeah.
Roger Corman movie. But so there is a ray of hope here, you know.
No pun intended.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. We destroyed your world.
No.
Now you didn't destroy the
we
world.
did that.
We did that.
But now all that's left is this
Well, that's
nightmare.
Being
cool. That's very
stuck
Planet
in
of
an
the
ice
Apes,
cream
too.
truck for 40 years. That's a
Still
nightmare.
feels weird to me that they just kind of get up and leave, but at least they have this scene where they, we have to rebuild.
Prime directive,
Yeah, exactly.
which they violated already.
When in doubt, invoke the Prime Directive.
So what now? How are we supposed to get home?
With magic.
I have an idea. Come on.
At the end of the story, we can do anything to get him home. But it actually kind of makes sense. I like this, actually, seeing the ruined Justice Guild manor. It's really neat. I love the last shot of the big shield table, too, because that was like such a big part of their iconography. So this is our one big alternate universe story that season. As I've said before, we gave ourselves that limitation. We can do one time travel story and one alternate universe story every season, if that. And this was a good one to do. A lot of fans don't like this episode, though, strangely enough. They think it's goofy. They don't understand it. They don't understand what the they think we're parodying the old Adam West show or something, which is strange.
There's a little bit of that with the police chief,
Sure,
but
sure, the Irish police captain, sure.
I mean, that's
you
what
saw
the
those
Batman
characters in the comic books. I mean,
Those cornball villains with
See, that's a painted background there, the Earth. That's our background. They just scanned it in and stuck it in there, and that's a Photoshop background. So yeah, this is part of our trial run back then. We were trying to figure out how to,
There's
do
the
things.
shot that you did on your script.
Bruce drew this whole scene out on a script page.
On a script page.
And
And
with all of his notes.
the retakes came
Yeah.
back all wrong, so he ended up
That's
redrawing
right.
his stuff and sending it to him to follow. So
and dedicating it to Gardner Fox.
Yeah.
So for the fans at home who don't know who Gardner Fox was, he was one of the major architects of the DC universe back in the Golden Age and even in the Silver Age. I mean, he was like one of the main writers of the Justice Society and wrote a lot of the early Justice League stories in the 60s. I mean, he just wrote a ton of stuff for DC Comics. He was part of the revitalization of Hawkman in the late 50s, and he was just a major, major player in the history of DC Comics. And specifically in the 60s, every year they would do these big Justice League meets the Justice Society crossover stories every summer. It's like their big event. Gardner Fox was responsible for writing those, the first couple of them. So this show it's all about Gardner Fox. So my hat's off to his memory. Okay, well, that's it. Bye.
Bye.
goodbye.
Happy trails.